Are we all? We're all over the place again.
Yep. Hold on. Let me
Way to
help.
go,
Let me
Joe.
help. Oh shit. Nope, that's wrong. Ah, it's making it
Brand new.
worse.
It is making
There
it
we
worse.
go. There we
How?
go.
Why? You know what? Every day. I got to. Anyway, hashtag sports, hashtag nation, Bills Mafia. Welcome back once again to the dumpster fire that we call sports talk over here at hashtag sports. Hopefully, you guys are having a good Sunday evening, just chilling. Before we get into any of the particulars of what we're going to be discussing for tonight's show, I just want to pay tribute to a legend, 87 years old, who passed on Friday, Jim Brown. Not enough could be said about what that guy did for the game of football, and even after he was done playing, he was just a tremendous individual, and he did so much for so many. So, I wanted to pay tribute to him. Guys, he was inducted into the Hall of Fame in 1971.
Isn't that crazy?
That yeah, his.
Yeah.
I was looking up his per 17 game averages.
Mhm.
It was 1,700. He had like over 300 carries, 1,700 rushing yards, and like 17 touchdowns every year.
Mhm.
The guy was a monster in his
Oh
time.
yeah. It's
Yeah.
an athlete above the level of athlete in the league at the time, right? Like
Oh,
you see those
100%.
players every now and again, right? Like Bo is like that level of player, right? Like Gale Sayers was that level of player. Like
Oh,
there were guys that were just simply better freak athletes than everybody else, and they reset what you accept as the generational talent, right? Like it's
yeah.
no Jim Brown, right? That changes the game of football.
Oh,
So
100%.
yeah.
100%. And speaking of freak athletes, I remember I was watching a documentary on Bo Jackson. And they said, we're lucky we got Bo when we did, because after that was like the steroid era that people were
Yeah.
always talking about, EDs and everything. If we'd have
Mhm.
got him then, everyone would have thought he was on something. And the guy
Yeah.
was just, he was a freak. So, that being said, you guys, you can find all of our content on TikTok, Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. All of our episodes will be going to iTunes and Spotify. Tonight's show is sponsored by Mr. Rogers Homes in the description of the video, in association with Crier.co, the Williams Syndrome Foundation, the hashtag sports charity for 2023. All super chats will be going to the Williams Syndrome Foundation. So make sure you keep that in mind when you decide to hit that button. I am flanked, as you could tell, by Paul and Joe. Ryan he had a late night at golf, so we're gonna leave it at that. So, as you can see from the title, what does the future hold for Mr. Gabriel Davis? Now, what's going to happen here tonight. I'll give you a preview. Joe's going to talk about, because he calls all of our games, so make sure that when the season rolls around, you tune into hashtag sports for all the games. Joe does the play-by-play. He'll tell you about his play on the field. Paul's going to tell you about him being in a contract year, and I'm going to sit back and listen to both of them, as all of you, and try to command the chat. So,
You should not be allowed to have beer.
This is very dangerous right
you're
now.
not wrong. You're not wrong, Paul. But that being said, he is a kind of, because of the additions that the Buffalo Bills made in the offseason and especially the draft, you wonder about Gabriel Davis and his future with the Buffalo Bills, especially coming into this 2023 season. Joe,
Right.
I want to start with you, and then I'll kick it over to Paul. You called all the games. You've seen how he played. You watched all the tapes on Gabe Davis. What is your impression of Davis going into the 2023 season?
Well, I mean, I think that going into the 2022 season, a lot of Bills fans and media in general had high hopes for Gabe Davis, right? They remembered the 4-touchdown AFC Championship game, and they thought that was the Gabe Davis we're going to see from here on out. And it just didn't mold that way. And maybe that's a little unfair to Gabriel Davis. Maybe that's, saying how much he didn't meet our expectations in 2022, but that just is what it is. Everyone could talk about how he had a few more catches. Anyone who's trying to back Gabe Davis is talking about how he had more catches last year than in his previous 2 years, but his catch percentage was lower than it's been in his first 3 years, only 51.6% catch percentage. Figure he was targeted 93 times, 48 receptions. I think that going into 2023, Gabriel Davis can really look at the Buffalo Bills roster, if he's smart enough, for his agent can tell him and say, listen, this team doesn't need you. You're looking at a guy who, and Paul will break this down a little bit when he talks about contract, who, when you look at Spot Track, his comparables as far as contracts goes, like a Christian Kirk, someone of that nature. And it's just like, this team doesn't need to sign a guy for $12 million a year, however much it would be, to get that type of production. We can get that pretty much anywhere. So I think that Gabe Davis going into 2023 needs to know that the Bills do not need you. However, I also see a space for Gabe Davis if he does finally meet those expectations that we've been expecting. Now, remember, Gabe Davis is what, 4th round draft pick. So you really can't say he's a bust in any way. He's been serviceable, but he also has only been serviceable. And I think that, even if it comes into the draft next season, we can find a 3rd or 4th round wide receiver who can give us what Gabe Davis can for far less money.
Yeah, and I think that's sort of the one thing that you have to remember about what's different in today's NFL is that the contracts for free agent receivers are wild, right? Like, just absolutely wild. Christian Kirk got $72 million. He's averaging $18 million a year. And I think there are Bills fans out there who had never heard of him. Right. But it's true. Like Russell Gage, who's like the definition of the sign a guy because you need somebody healthy receiver, is getting $10 million a season. Right. Like the money for an average NFL wide receiver on the free agent market is exorbitantly high. And your window to re-sign Gabe Davis, it's now. If you're going to keep him long term, you have to do it now. And I don't think Buffalo's really ready to do that. Let alone have the cash to do that, because he's only making a little bit under $3 million this year as far as salary goes. So anything you do is going to be a pay increase, right? Yeah. And when you look at the contracts, like Michael Gallup got 5 years for $57.5 million, and the dude's missed almost his entire NFL career, right? Because he's always hurt. Gabe Davis, while he's been durable, again, you see those sort of that lack of production. So the question is Gabe Davis the player that you need, or is he just the person who's been there when you needed the player, right? Like, from an X's and O's standpoint, what exactly do you think rolls downhill if Buffalo doesn't re-sign Gabe Davis, or goes into this year saying, we'll let him play out? We know what this looks like, right? Like, we've seen this before when Buffalo lets players play their last year on a contract.
Yeah. They'll try to lock those guys up before they have the monster years. I mean, like this past year, we were talking about Tremaine Edmonds. Obviously, as Joe mentioned, 4th round pick versus 1st round pick. You're talking about expectation level of the guy. I think a lot of people will be hearkening back to Isaiah Hodgins. I think that's going to be a big, thing. Did they keep the right guy in that draft? I mean, we've talked about it many times on this show that after they got Stephon Diggs in that 2020 draft, they kind of punted the rest of the draft, and they end up getting 2 receivers, Hodges and Davis, in that same draft late in that one. They were like, okay, we're just going to throw something in the wall and see what happens. As far as Davis goes, from a contract standpoint, I'm surprised Paul didn't mention the number one guy on that contract mountain that he probably would be comparable to. Probably not the length of the contract, but probably still the amount, is Zay Jones. Jones at age. Now, let's just say this. Davis will be 25 in his contract year when he becomes a free agent. So he will be 25 years old. He will have 4 years of service in the NFL. So he will be a free agent. Zay Jones at 27 got a 3-year, $24 million deal. Now, the number there is intriguing. But like you said, that was in 2019. Contracts have gone insane since then.
Big time.
So the way that it works is I think Davis himself sees the clock ticking. I think he sees, okay, they got Shakir, they got Shorter, they got Kincaid, they got all these guys going on now. We got some help in the backfield. He had his snap count for 2022 was actually more than Stephon Diggs last year. And Paul, I mean, we talked about it. He was like, they had a veteran in John Brown, and then they brought in Davis. Davis stretches the field a different way than John Brown. He's not a burner, but he's a big guy that can body up individuals and, make some of them tough catches. Obviously not by the statistics, because I think he only has like a 54%, catch percentage or something like that.
Yeah. And that's standard across his career. Like what you saw last year is really no different than what you've seen in previous years, right? Like he's a little bit above 50%.
Yeah. But here's what I want to ask, Paul. Of the contracts that you've seen, you know how, employers are always like, well, you have to have experience and education at the same time. of the contracts you've seen and the players that have been drafted in recent years, how much do you think Gabe Davis's experience will help him get a bigger deal next year? And if so, will the Bills match that, or will they just go back to the drawing board again and just draft another guy?
I mean, the wonderful thing about the NFL is that there's always a team willing to do something amazingly more stupid than you are, right? So you could be looking at Gabe Davis gets transition tagged, right? And like the tags are definitely in play, because when you're talking about that much money, I don't think Buffalo is comfortable giving that much money now. But at the same token, I definitely don't think they're going to be comfortable giving that much money the end of next offseason, right? And they've definitely put enough coins in the machine to hope that you just hit the lottery again, right? You look at Shorter, you've already got Shakir here. So like, it's not like they've been absent bringing in young receivers. But my question to Joe is, depending on, I just named two players. Mario just named one a moment ago, and Kincaid. So you've got Shakir, Kincaid, and Justin Shorter. All that you're hoping are going to take some pressure off of Gabe Davis.
Sure.
Is that the idea here?
Sure. I mean, you look at how Shakir kind of came into his own last year towards the end, right? We didn't use him all that much, and a lot of Bills fans, myself included, wanted to see him used more. I remember when we drafted him last year, I was very excited. That was like the guy I circled on day 3. And I would expect to see Shakir's snap count go up. I think it was Dan Gowries in the comment section talked about how, maybe Gabe Davis just isn't that number 2. Maybe he's a high end number 3, low end number 2 type player. So if we can get Kincaid some of those targets, how much pressure does that take off Gabe Davis? And what can Gabe Davis do to open the field? Because again, we saw Gabe Davis at his best in that championship game against the Kansas City Chiefs, right? He did everything right in that game. And if we get just a smidgen of that back, then this Bills offense with the weapons that they have can be very dangerous. But also, Mario, we talked about names that might be going unnoticed. Look what we did in the running game. And just adding running attack takes so much pressure off the wide receivers. So I think that will be a huge help as well.
Yeah, I mean, Paul likes when I do this every once in a while, but if you look at the draft profile of both Gabe Davis when he came out and Justin Shorter, I mean, Shorter, he has not as good a score as Davis, but he's 2 inches taller and 10 pounds heavier. I don't know if that's going to play a factor into it. Paul, we always talk about them cycling positions all the time. Could Justin Shorter, if he can be, now we're not talking about replacing, Stephon Diggs here, guys. We're talking about a guy that had 35, and 48 catches. And with the addition of Dalton Kincaid, I believe it does take some pressure off of Davis. And I believe Davis will have some more one-on-one matchups this season. The question is, A, will he be targeted? And B, will he produce when targeted? I mean, we saw some untimely drops by him. I mean, we mentioned it last week when we were talking about the one throw that Allen had versus the Jets, near the end of that game. He heaved it down there 70 yards. He knocked a 3 off of Davis's jersey. You know what I mean? It's tough because you don't know which direction that the offense is going to go in the second year under Dorsey, because we saw a lot of the similar things that he ran with Dable. But then if you look at it, I mean, with 35, and now he had 48, he had 63 targets in 2021, now jumped to 93. Is that Allen just trying to shoot the moon, or what is that comprised of? Like, why are they trying to target him more? Are they trying to see if he could be a legit number 2, or is he just a very good number 3? It's going to be interesting to see, because you have one football and all these bodies that are going to be there for you. And I think what Joe mentioned with Shorter is that when it comes around 53-man roster time, is he protected? Or is he cut? Is he waived and put on the practice squad?
You're not waiving Justin Shorter.
No,
you can't do it. No, I mean, you look. That's a physical specimen that played well enough in college that's not sneaking by. And I understand that rosters are all going from 90 to 53 all at once, right? Yeah. There's going to be a lot of very good players exposed on waivers, and that's because you're going to need to cut young guys, because if you're trying to shift Von Miller to IR, Von Miller has to make your 53-man roster. And then you have to waive a player that you plan on keeping because Von Miller has to be on your 53-man roster. So the next day you can IR him, and then you got to bring one of those players back, right? So every NFL team is going to be in that position. I don't think you can do that with a player like Shorter, because you do that, well, you're going to expose him in the same way that other teams have to expose their young talent while trying to roster players that they ultimately know they have to give some sort of designation to. I think it's interesting, Mar, that you brought up, and we've talked about, taking pressure off of Gabe Davis. When you talk about Dalton Kincaid, right? Like, you're talking about a sure-handed target is the way it's being billed. And I think it was pretty easy to say that if you look at the Bills receiving core the last season specifically, you had Dawson Knox, who historically isn't the surest of hands, right? No. Isaiah McKenzie, who historically hasn't been the surest of hands. You brought back John Brown, who had been on 5 teams since the Bills released him. Cole Beasley was retired. And then, you look at poor Gabe Davis, and again, he's got a career sub 60% catch percentage, right? So it wasn't good last year, right?
Yeah. And let's also not forget, last year, Stephon Diggs had a little bit of the drops too, which is uncharacteristic.
It's uncharacteristic for him. But even looking at Kincaid, right? A lot of people say, well, Kincaid's here to take some pressure off Dawson Knox. And it's hard for me to argue against that, right? But the fact of the matter is this team has added a guy who can catch, and Gabe Davis was billed as a guy who's just automatic. And we see flashes of that, right? There are times where Gabe on the sidelines made highlight reel catches, and they came so consecutively, you kind of just expected them to happen all the time. And then you have a season like last year where you're like, oh, Gabe normally makes that play. It's a highlight reel play, but Bills fans the season before had just kind of become accustomed to it. Do you think we're a victim of just having too high expectations for Gabe Davis because of the flash? I mean, the fact of the matter is, Mar, how many career receptions does he have?
118.
Yeah, that's what I mean, right?
You look at the statistics. Yeah. 16.8 per, though. I mean, so when he does make catches, they are of the monumental nature. I mean, I'm just looking at his 2022 stats compared to Dawson Knox. And maybe this is a discussion more for Dalton Kincaid, but you look at, he was targeted 13 times inside the 20, and he caught 6 passes for 3 touchdowns. I mean, that's less than half. I mean, that's not something that you expect from a guy 6'2", 220. Dawson Knox was targeted 9 times, and he caught 7 of those for 5 touchdowns. So it's probably more of a discussion for Dalton Kincaid, but by doing this, he may see a drop, obviously, in his targets. He may see an influx. I don't think it's going to stay the same at all. I mean, I think he's either going to be at 115 for targets, or he's going to drop back to the 60s where he was, therefore dropping his value on the open market. Now, Paul, I know you said there's a lot of teams that love to do stupid stuff. And Gabe Davis is a very interesting prospect in that. At 25 years old, playing on a winning team, bringing that outside presence, that big physical presence outside, I understand that. But it's almost like one of those things where you're like, he may be a forgotten man, and then by playoff time, he rattles off 10 for 200 because nobody's paying attention to him the entire year because they're focused on Kincaid and Davis. So as far as it goes, it's going to be really interesting to see how that develops in the first 4 weeks. We always talk about the first quarter of the season. What are they going to do with him, and how are they going to switch things in and out? Is he going to be a decoy for everyone else underneath, along with Diggs and Kincaid, or did they bring in Kincaid to try to see what the full potential of Gabe Davis is? Now, I keep seeing Shakir in the chat. I understand that. However, Shakir's more of a slot guy. He's going to be more your guy that switches in and out, I think, with Kincaid. That's just my opinion. I could be wrong.
Well, and don't forget, when you drafted Kincaid, right, does that limit those moves of putting Diggs in the slot, right? Because we saw that a bunch when Buffalo needed to get the ball moving. They'd move Diggs into the slot just for some easy yards. And by bringing a player like Kincaid, are you trying to mitigate doing that? Like, from a X's and O's standpoint, Mario, what does that mean when you bring in a player like Kincaid? Because Diggs did a lot of damage out of the slot last year, and that does take away snaps from a player like Shakir, and it should open up things over the top for a player like Davis. But the fact is that's not how it worked last year, right? While Diggs was dangerous in the slot, that's all that it turned out to be.
Yeah, I think first of all, I love the idea of Diggs in the slot. I thought they should have did that the year before. And Dorsey came out game 1 against LA and started using that. And I was like, Paul, it was like one of those things where I was like, they're finally doing it,
Yeah.
Because you look at it and it's more beneficial to Diggs to do that because he's going to extend his career probably 3 more years than he would have if he goes down to the slot. He's definitely going to extend his career. That's number one. Number two, you look at that, bringing him into the slot, Kincaid's not going to be there for 90% of the snaps. So you could still use those in some packages. So what happens is it gives you options in your offense as far as that goes. I think they're going to still utilize Diggs in the slot with Kincaid, and you're going to have Davis on the outside. However, who do you put on the other side? Are you putting Knox on the outside? Are you trying to give that type of a look? Because I'll be honest with you, we're talking about Davis and we're saying, oh, this could be the last year, the last dance for him in 2023. However, if he goes down, who do you really have other than Diggs on the outside for you? What does that look like? You're going to put Justin Shorter there with, McDermott's time on task and everything. So how do you plan to maneuver that? I think Diggs still comes down to the slot, but what happened was last year when he came down to the slot, everybody knew where the Bills were going. You didn't have a threat on the other side. So you could still bring him down to the slot and have Kincaid on the other side to try to balance that out for you. And what it does is just opens up options in your offense. Now, is the option, like you said, Davis over the top? Will he catch it? You got to have that trust in your receiver if you're going to put the ball out there for him, So,
well, and Joe, the current wide receiver, the Bills currently have what looks like 15 wide receivers on the roster. There's a lot. There are a lot of receivers on the roster.
Yeah.
So we have Braden Johnson, Gabe Davis, Stephon Diggs, Brian Thompson, Khalil Shakir, Trent Sherfield, Jake Kumaro is back. I honestly didn't realize they re-signed him. Jalen Wayne, Cole Beasley is still listed on the roster. I don't know why.
Yeah.
Deontay Hardy, Desmond Patman, Justin Shorter, Tyrell Shavers, Keyshawn Johnson, not that Keyshawn, and Isaiah Coulter, right? And amongst those, you only have, let's see here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There's only 5 players with 3 or more years experience of the 10 I just named, right? And those players are Diggs, Trent Sherfield, Jake Kumaro, and Cole Beasley. Right? So do you have enough?
Sneaky. I'm telling you, Shavers is so sneaky to me, dude. I think he's gonna be the camp darling.
But Mario, we're looking for another outside presence. You bring up a great point, right? It's a great point. Listen, I'd say Joe Sharp is available, but Joe, you're sub 6 foot, so you're not playing the outside for that Bills team, right? Yeah, you're sub 6 foot. But that's what you need. And does this roster have it? Right. I know you tried to be sneaky with Sherfield and you're trying to be sneaky with Deontay Hardy, but aren't you building another roster like we saw with Josh's first year, where it was a undersized wide receiver class? Are we going back to that?
Right. Yeah. No, I mean, we have 3 wide receivers that sit at 6'4" now, though. Again, no experience whatsoever between the 3 of them. You got Shorter, Shavers, and then Patman, all listed at 6'4". So you could tell the Buffalo Bills knew that size could be an issue, which going into the draft, going into undrafted free agents. And so that should tell you something about what they think about Gabe Davis as well. Now is short. I think Mario asked a question earlier about how much do we use Gabe Davis early on. I think if Gabe Davis gets any looks this season, it has to be early on, and he'll have to show early on that he can be trusted by Josh Allen if he wants any looks moving forward, because we know that and Paul brought this up about McDermott, or I know Mario brought this up about McDermott waiting on a lot of these prospects to really get them going. And that includes, like I said earlier, Shakir last year. Now we expect Dalton Kincaid to be there, but again, Dalton Kincaid's going to be your slot guy, where Gabe Davis is going to be your outside presence. So I think we're going to see maybe a lot of, and by a lot, I mean 5 or 6 targets a game going towards Gabe Davis early on in the season. And it really depends how he responds to those. That tells us how much playing time he's going to get the rest of the season. But I do look at the wide receiver market, or roster for the Buffalo Bills. And yeah, like you said, there's just not something there that really jumps out at you and says, okay, we got size and we have the experience here that we need. But at the same time, again, we're talking about 48 catches. Give me shorter, and let's see if you can get me 48 catches.
So do you think the Bills might just be waiting out that move? Right. Oh, sorry. I just put a comment up and I completely blocked half of what you're putting up
No,
there.
that's all right, because it's not blocking the important stuff. Don't worry about it. It's not.
It's about Jake Kumaro and the instant championship we have since he's on the roster. No, my question is, do you think the Bills are just kind of waiting out that cut? Right, we're going from 90 to 53. There's going to be some good players that are available, but again, oftentimes you're going to see younger players available. I don't know if the depth of experience is going to be there, where Buffalo's going to be able to add a roster cut wide receiver with some experience that plays the outside, right? But do you think Buffalo's just kind of waiting it out a little bit? You just kind of wait. I think it's an underplayed point, because it's half the league is going to become a free agent.
Right.
Like, think about it. Half of the roster players are about to become free agents once those roster cuts happen. You could probably find yourself another outside receiver there.
Yeah, right. But you also, like I said, you have 3 guys. Prove yourself, right? Mario said that he thinks Shavers can be a training camp darling, and that might be the case. Maybe one of these guys jumps out. I talked about this when we did our RAS score video. You think about a guy like, and I just lost his name, Victor Cruz, right? He went into preseason. No one knew who that kid was, undrafted free agent. And he came out and, showed what he could do. And then all of a sudden the Giants have a number 2, and I think he was number 1 for them for a little bit as well. That lasted a few years and did a few salsas on people. And maybe we have a guy like that in the making. So yeah, it's a little of, we know that there's going to be outside receivers. When it comes to cut down times, we know that there's going to be an outside receiver that we could pick up if we need to. But you also think about last year, you think about the injury to Crowder, and I think we had a few more injuries, and you brought up, bringing back John Brown, bringing back Cole Beasley, bringing back, we know that there's guys that are going to be out there that we might be able to give a look later in the season if we need to, if Gabe Davis goes down.
It was like a dorm room rebound party.
Right.
I mean, Paul, you said during the offseason, the one position other than the linebacker position you wanted to see the Bills go heavy on was the wide receiver position.
Yeah.
Guys, Deontay Hardy, Trent Sherfield, and drafting a 5th-round guy in Justin Shorter. This is what not having money in the offseason looks like.
Yeah, that's a great point.
You're paying Stephon Diggs, obviously. You have Gabe Davis. You have him for another year. But then you go and get 2 guys who are in their 5th or 6th year in the league. But they're going to be coming into this offense like a rookie. They're coming in new. You know what I mean? You got Justin Shorter coming in new. You got Shakir, who has, other than Diggs and Davis, he's your most experienced receiver on the roster. And he's in his 2nd season. I can't remember which one of you guys mentioned that, but that's disturbing to me. So what do you do to circumvent that? You draft a tight end, to try to take pressure off these kids and try to see if they can learn it. I mean, you look at Sherfield out there. Okay, Sherfield, he can burn, so he can stretch the field for you. You look at Hardy, he can burn, but he's 5'6". You know what I mean? And you look at Shorter, who he takes one stride at 7 yards. You know what I mean? The guy's a freak. You know what I mean? So you look at all of these things combined and you say, okay, listen, this is what the Bills have to work with before cuts. Now, I'm not saying that they may acquire, talent to try to trade later. That's another episode for us. So, like, if you have Sherfield lighting it up in preseason or Hardy lighting it up in preseason and you need a wide out, now, I'm not going to say they wouldn't entertain it, but the point is, when you're paying so much and you're right up against the cap, this is what your wide receiver room looks like. You have one stud and a bunch of guys around them that can hopefully help him out.
Right.
So,
yeah, that's right. Yeah, I totally agree, Mar. And really, when you look at it, right, you gave a 2-year contract to Hardy at $9.5 million, and then Sherfield is like 1.7 something, right?
Yeah.
So you just took but what you're doing is you're saying this is Gabe Davis's money that we could spend next year, and we're just going to get a few players, and we're just going to see what happens, right? Because a player like Sherfield, why would he leave? Right? Like, if the Bills do well this season, he's on a contract year right now. He's on a 1-year deal. Why would he leave? Right? You look at the opportunity and say, hey, wait a minute, hold on a second. Let me look around the room. There ain't fucking nobody here but me. All right, I'm staying.
You get one.
That's it. We
That's
got the
your
one. We got the one. But it's
Yeah.
true, right? Buffalo offers an incredible amount of opportunity at the wide receiver position if you're just patient. Because last year, that wide receiver group gave you a ton of opportunities to play, but the Bills were just too shy and just went back and got the rebound players that they were familiar with because the system was kind of similar, right?
Yeah.
I don't think they're going to let that mistake happen again because you saw what that looked like. I just don't think they're going to let that happen again.
Yeah, and just to kind of double up on the point, guys, what we were talking about. When we talk about they're overlapping some contracts with Davis just to make sure and to cover themselves so they're not backed into a corner. You know, first of all, when they got Poyer and Hyde, they overlapped their deals. They didn't sign them to similar deals. It was the years didn't match up. Then what did the Bills do after that? They draft Jaquan Johnson and 2 years later draft DeMar Hamlin. So you have to do that. You have to cycle out possessions like that and overlap them. Could Shorter be the guy that's the overlap for Davis? We don't know. We're gonna time will tell on that. But this is literally what you get when you have to try to solidify your team, especially the receiving core. And I know this receiving core in and of itself does not scare anybody. I knew Tom Brady through to guys that people never even heard of. I mean, Peyton Manning made Austin Collie a star. Now, I'm not saying that Josh Allen is either one of those guys, but he is a top 5 quarterback in the NFL, and those guys are getting paid the money to do that, to make stars out of these guys that nobody knows. So hopefully with Dorsey, with Allen, these guys can make a lot of noise in 2023, and the Buffalo Bills can score a lot of points. These guys, these 6 that are on the screen right. Oh, I'll put it back up. These 6 guys that are on the screen right now for the wide receiver core, that just the top 6. This is our lads now. It's not official, nothing like that. But what I'm saying is, these 6 guys can be dangerous with Allen. That's all I know. And we're going to have to wait and see how Dorsey decides to use them. So,
yeah. One thing we really didn't talk about too much about signing Gabe Davis next year. If you look at the salary cap for the Bills next year, it's not much prettier than it was this past season. So, so the money isn't there again. So you really, as Paul and Mario alluded to earlier, the wide receiver market is so different. You really got hope if you're a team like the Buffalo Bills, you hit in the draft and you could just say, bye-bye, Gabe. Like, we can't pay you that much. Best of luck.
Well, you got your
money's not going to be there next year either.
I think you still have your conditional for Tremaine Edmonds. But the other thing is this. I wouldn't be surprised if they start flipping some of these guys that they have before they cut them for picks, late round picks, 6th, 7th round picks.
Because Buffalo's done it before.
They've always done it. Yep.
They've done it before.
That's what the Bills need. More 6th round picks. We already have 3. Let's just take over the 6th round.
Let them do it. They're controllable deals. All right. Hashtag Nation, hashtag Sports. Thank you for joining us tonight. As always, you can find all of our stuff, TikTok, Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Tonight's show was sponsored by Mr. Rogers Homes in association with crier.co. All of our shows will go to iTunes and Spotify. Make sure you smash that like and subscribe button on the way out. For Paul and Joe, I am Mario. We're hashtag Sports, and we're out of here, guys.
Hello, fellow Bills fans. Sean Rogers, realtor and lead of the Mr. Rogers Homes team. Did you know that real estate is one of the best ways to build wealth, and right now is one of the best times to own an investment property in Arizona? Please reach out to me. I'd be more than happy to answer any of your questions so we can take the next step to your financial freedom here in the Valley of the Sun, utilizing real estate. As always, God bless America and go Buffalo!